Hi everybody, welcome back. And if you're new, welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do, I cover true crime cases, and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older. So if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe down below, click the subscribe button and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So if you're new to my channel and you don't already know this, for the last 4 months of the year, I have a series for every single month, and October is Oldies October, where I cover some very vintage cases. For our second case of Oldies October, I'm going to be covering a case that I first stumbled across a couple years ago, and I've been requested to cover it a few times since. It involves the disappearance of a woman who many, including her loved ones, felt wasn't in the right frame of mind. She left town with a handsome man. Family received a single letter from her, and then it was like she vanished off the face of the earth. There's not a whole ton of information about this one, but I did do a little bit of digging and I came up with enough information for a video. This is the unsolved disappearance of Betty Marie Roberts. According to Ancestry.com, Betty Marie Roberts was born on July 16th of 1930 in Jackson, Tennessee, to parents Lena and John Roberts. She had an older sister named Louise, who was 14 years older than her. About Betty, Louise was quoted saying, "She was just like a big baby doll to me." Her loved ones referred to her as a blue-eyed beauty. Although there was a bit of an age difference between Betty and Louise, they were extremely close. Louise had been there for her sister through 2 divorces. She was always there for her when she needed her the most. The year was 1959. The location was Charlotte, North Carolina. Betty at this time had 2 small daughters, Della and Nancy, that were ages 4 and 3. She had recently divorced from their father, George Conrad Atwell, that same year. He was a sheet metal worker, and their relationship was definitely a tumultuous one. He was known for being a heavy drinker and having a bit of a temper, especially when he drank. Betty moved on pretty quickly after the divorce. It very well could have been one of those situations where she was unhappy for quite a bit of time at the end of the marriage, so when the divorce was final, she may have felt like, wow, I'm finally free. I possibly get the chance to experience a genuine love now. Louise was happy for her and thought, based on the liquor and aggression, anyone had to be better than George. Betty and Louise had been looking for work, and they saw an ad in the local paper that caught their attention. This ad was placed by a man who was looking to hire someone for an assistant position for his traveling photography business. He needed someone to set up appointments for color portraits. Both of them responded to the ad, and the man came out to Louise's home on Robinson Circle for an interview. Louise said he had a tongue like velvet, was a smooth talker, telling us how much we could make. The two were hired immediately. It didn't take long after being hired for Betty to fall for this photographer, a photographer who said his name was Charles Wegman. Louise was hopeful that this new relationship forming between the two would be healthy and prosperous, something that Betty had never really experienced before. Things from the very start were a bit off with Charles, but these things were mostly overlooked until Betty's disappearance because it seemed that Charles was treating Betty well. Even when Betty had a surprising mental breakdown and checked herself into Broughton Hospital, a psychiatric hospital in Morganton, North Carolina. She stayed there for a few weeks, was released, and seemed to be doing better. Her stay at this facility for ones deemed mentally ill did not scare Charles. He was actually there for Betty during this time that she was struggling severely with her mental health. If you've ever met someone and they just seemed too good to be true, like they're just too nice, they're too outgoing, they're too giving, and there's just something about them that is rubbing you the wrong way, but you can't really put your finger on it, that was Charles. As reported in the Charlotte Observer, he bought her new clothes, a ring, and wrote sweet, encouraging letters. Much of what was written in these letters and notes to Betty from Charles is unknown. It's been kept private, but we do know that one said, "Keep a stiff upper lip and don't worry. You've got a lifetime job." It's obvious that at this time, Charles was trying to make Betty feel safe and secure, especially financially secure. But was he doing this because he cared and loved her, or was he doing this to possibly manipulate her? One odd thing about Charles, though, something Louise realized but never questioned verbally to Betty herself, was that he never actually signed his name. He would write Betty all of these notes and letters, very much leaning on the side of being love letters, but he never signed them, especially not with his last name. Charles rarely called Betty her actual name though. He did have a nickname for her, and this was a nickname that he used at the beginning of all of his letters to her, and it was Poo Poo. It is a very unique pet name, and I guess it's mentioned in a lot of articles and missing persons pages for Betty, because they're kind of just being like, hey, if you remember anyone being called Poo Poo by their significant other, maybe give us a call because you might know where a missing person is. Very little was known about Charles. All they really knew was that he was tall, conventionally attractive. They believed he may have either been Italian or Hispanic. He looked to be in his late 30s, and he claimed to be originally from Houston, Texas. Louise would later describe Charles as, quote, tall and thick and pleasant looking in his late 30s. This relationship between Betty and Charles continued for some time, and then Betty made a visit to her sister, and what she informed her of left Louise in shock. How serious Betty and Charles were becoming was unknown, but Betty dropped by on November 3rd of 1959 and told her sister that she was leaving town with him and not taking her 2 daughters with her. Yes, Charles was a traveling photographer, but Louise never thought that if he decided to leave town at some time, that either of them were going to go with him. Betty basically told Louise that she had made up her mind and the 2 of them were leaving for Maryland. Louise told her sister, if you walk out, you are not my sister. Don't ever come back. That was the last thing that Louise ever said to Betty. And yes, it was harsh, but can you really blame her? Betty was putting so much responsibility on her older sister after everything she had done for her. At that time, Betty was 29 and Louise was 43. Louise loved her nieces, but she wasn't ready to take on the full responsibility of caring for them for who knows how long. Betty walked right out the door. That was the last time Louise ever saw her sister. Louise would discover that from leaving her home that day, Betty took a taxi to a motel on Highway 49 North and later left the motel with Charles in a Cadillac. During her search for Betty, this is what the motel clerk would tell Louise. A week after leaving, Louise received a letter in the mail from Betty. It was postmarked from Baltimore, Maryland, which is a city roughly 440 miles northeast of Charlotte. In this letter, she stated that she was fine and would keep in contact. She did not, though, and the reasoning for that is completely unknown. When Louise didn't hear anything else from her sister, she decided to contact the local authorities. From there, she contacted the FBI. She told an FBI agent that a smooth-talking man named Charles Wegman came into her sister's life and her sister left town with him, and she hasn't heard from her since. Louise showed the FBI agent photos of Betty and Charles, and when the FBI agent saw a photo of Charles, he immediately said, "Why, that isn't Charles Wegman, that's Charles Dennison." Louise's stomach dropped. She knew that there had to have been a reason he hadn't been signing his name. She knew there had to have been a reason that he had been so secretive. Now she finds out that he was using a false last name the entire time. Who even was this man that her sister left with? The agent seemed interested though and asked her for more pictures and a sample of Charles's handwriting, all of which Louise handed over. She gave him anything and everything that she had on him. The agent, on the other hand, wouldn't tell Louise how they knew of him. All he said was he's the type of person who gets close enough to the fire to get warm, but not burned. To me, personally, that sounds like Charles had been connected to a lot of crimes, possibly served short amounts of time in jail, but was never connected to any crimes on a larger scale, anything to put him behind bars for a long time. Or maybe he had been connected to larger crimes, but they never had enough evidence to convict him. Either way, he was on the FBI's radar, and that's enough to make anyone concerned for their loved one in his company. In the end though, Betty was a grown woman and left on her own accord. They told Louise if she wants to get lost, it's her business. This is why there has never been an official search for Betty Marie Roberts. Time passed and Louise was unable to be the full-time guardian of her nieces, so they were put into an orphanage and then into foster homes. She never gave up though and kept searching for her sister for years. She stayed in contact with Della and Nancy, and when they were old enough, they helped in the search for their missing mother as well. An article was released in the Charlotte Observer on January 3rd of 1994. This article, written directly to Betty for most of it, highlights the main details of Betty's disappearance and explains that Louise, Della, and Nancy were not upset with Betty. They just wanted to know what happened to her or where she had been for the last 34 years. Her sister Louise at the time was 77 years old and living in public housing for the elderly. Both Della and Nancy, her daughters, were married and had made lives for themselves. Above all, they just wanted to know where their mother was or what exactly happened to her. Nancy was quoted saying, "Even if she is dead, it would be our peace of mind to know." The family wrote to Unsolved Mysteries, hoping that the case would be picked up for an episode. It wasn't. They unfortunately could not hire a private investigator at the time because they didn't have enough money to do so. They called all Wegman, Dennison, and Atwell families in Houston and Baltimore to see if anyone had seen Betty or Charles, and no one had. They checked the Social Security office to see if Betty had used her Social Security number in any way since she left. She hadn't. They checked driver's license bureaus and missing persons bureaus. Nothing. Now, there were a few supposed sightings of Betty through the years, but these could never be verified. For one, in the 1960s, someone showed Louise a woman's magazine, and there was a photo of a woman in it that looked identical to Betty. Louise called the magazine in New York, and unfortunately, the people working at the magazine would not tell her anything regarding the model. Then a friend thought she saw Betty at a diner in Florida, but the woman that she thought was Betty paid her bill and quickly left. This friend was unable to get to this woman to see if it was Betty or not. In late 1993, a minister from Virginia led a revival that Louise attended, and when she shook his hand, he looked at her puzzled and asked, "Do you have a sister in Virginia?" Louise explained that she did have a sister, but she had gone missing years prior. The minister told her that there was a woman in Virginia that talks like her, and if you put the two of them side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Louise asked how old the woman was, and the minister said that she was about 60 or 61, which would have been not far off from Betty's age at the time. Louise, though, was unable to ever track this woman down. This coming month, it will be 65 years that Betty's remaining loved ones have gone without a single clue as to what happened to her. According to the International Missing Persons Wiki, Betty has been ruled out as being 21 unidentified women. On the screen are 18 of them that have pages online to view. This list includes the Jane Doe known as the cheerleader in the trunk, a case that I covered years back on my channel who I so desperately want to see identified. Betty Marie Roberts was 29 years old when she left her home in Charlotte, North Carolina on November 3rd of 1959. She stood between 5 feet 6 inches tall and 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed approximately 140 pounds. She was last known to have been in Baltimore, Maryland. She had brunette hair and blue eyes. She had a scar on her stomach and also a tattoo of the name Jeff on her left forearm that she got for her first husband, Martin William Jefferson. This case is almost 65 years old, so the chances of someone coming forward now are slim, but you never know. So if you do have any information regarding the disappearance of Betty Marie Roberts, you are urged to contact Maryland State Police at 410-290-0050. There are very few articles or videos covering this case, but one of the main ones is a WordPress article posted on June 20th of 2016. This is the original article that I stumbled across years ago, and the writer of it did a little bit of a deep dive, and they located public records for a Charles Clinton Dennison. I found the records myself as well, and this very well could be Charles, the Charles that she left with. This man was born in 1923 in Texas. He would have been about 36 in 1959, and he had served time behind bars in the late 40s and early 50s for charges such as burglary and theft. He had served in the military and at one time lived in New York. His death record states he passed away on August 10th of 1983 in Harris County, Texas, which is about 5 miles east of Houston. I do have to say that there is no verification from law enforcement that this was in fact the Charles Dennison that she left with. So I can't say for certain that this was him, but these are public records. This was a real person, and this could have been the Charles that we are talking about today. So that is all of the information that I have for you all today when it comes to the disappearance of Betty Marie Roberts. Overall, I feel for the ones that were left behind, the ones who missed her dearly, who were so confused for so long, who went decades and are still living today, wondering what exactly happened. Just because Betty left home with this criminal doesn't mean that she stayed with him. They could have parted ways, something could have happened to her, he could have been responsible for her death. We really don't know what happened. The part of it that's so unbelievable to me is that they called so many people on the phone and no one seemed to know who he was or have any idea as to where they could have been. This was a man with a supposed photography business, so what happened to his business? Was it all a cover-up to lure a vulnerable woman? I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that a person used a business, fake or not, to find someone that they viewed as a perfect victim. I want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about Betty's case. We hear so many times in cases of women who have mysteriously vanished that they possibly just up and left with a man. And in this case, this did actually happen. She did leave with a man, and why that is, we don't know. You could say that she was in love, but I'm sure she loved her daughters more. So how could she have left her daughters behind? Was it one of those situations where she thought she would be able to go off with him and create a life somewhere else and be able to become financially stable and make an income with him working for his photography business, and then she would be able to bring her daughters later? That wasn't discussed though. So why did she leave with this man? I feel for her daughters. I truly, truly do. And I can't imagine what they went through, and of course what Louise went through for so many years being left in the dark. Like always, you never know who may come across this video, so leave some kind words down below in the comments. I also wanted to let you all know that I have been reading everyone's comments on my last video, which is the disappearance of Alice Corbett, and so many people said that they really want to see a video on Bertha Mellish's case, so that is coming up in my next video. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, stay safe like always, and I hope to see you for that video.